Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission targets 4 million more metered customers in Nigeria. Nigeria absent from list of countries with dirtiest electricity grids, plus oil prices edge higher on falling U.S. inventories. China data. Details of these and more on Business Express on the network service of the NTA. And we're reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Musa Abubakar, your guide. Now let's bring you up to speed with business development. Nigerian Export Trade House is now operational in the People's Republic of China. This follows the launch of the 8,000 square meter warehouse with a capacity of 6,000 metric tons of agro commodities in Changsha, Hunan province by Nigerian Export Promotion Council, NEPC. Comfort Amadou reports that Nigeria has also signed an agricultural cooperation agreement with China towards strengthening economic trade relations. Agricultural producers and merchants have raised concerns over the abuse of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The concerns are primarily in the area of rice importation outside the continent by the countries in the West African sub-region and making its way into Nigeria in the name of Free Trade Area. Musa Baba Liu has details of the press conference by some stakeholders in the rice production value chain.
Under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, only produce and products from the continent should be traded freely. Nigeria is therefore worried over the manner her neighbors are importing parboiled rice from other continents that might end up being smuggled into her shore. Statistics indicate that rice importation by one of her neighboring countries increased from 5 metric tons monthly to 261 metric tons.
Positioning the Nigerian Customs Service for effective manning of the borders. Smuggling of rice across the land borders is the main bane of the Nigerian rice subsector. The incoming administration must have to devise new strategies of dealing with smugglers and economic saboteurs if we want our food security program, as well as the huge investment of both the government of Nigeria and the private sector in the rice subsector to survive.
On the issue of quality and packaging, Nigerian rice had been recognized as the best in Africa. However, high cost of the produce remains a major challenge.
Beyond the increases in price of input, which farmers use for their production purposes, farmers were also having challenge in terms of number of farmers returning back to farm because of the crisis, some of the crisis, security crisis we have in the country. So all this have impacted on prices of farmers' output from the farm. That indirectly affects the cost of producing a finished product. Because
research indicates that rice consumption in Nigeria has increased by over 50% in recent years. Musa Baba Aliyu.
Now, the National Bureau of Statistics says Nigeria's headline inflation rate increased to 22.04% on a year-on-year basis in March 2023. This is according to the NBS Consumer Price Index and Inflation Report for March 2023, released in Abuja on Monday. According to the report, the figure is 0.13% higher compared to the 21.91% recorded in February 2023. It says on a year-on-year basis, the headline inflation rate in March 2023 was 6.13% higher than the rate recorded in March 2022 at 15.92%. And now joining me to discuss the latest inflation figures by the National Bureau of Statistics is Dr. Sani Haruna, a financial analyst. You're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, if you look at it, 22.04%, you compare it to that of February, which is around 21.91%. What would you say is what would you attribute this rise to?
Okay. Inflation rates in Nigeria, we cannot just attribute it to a single factor. So there are a lot of factors, mostly structural. There are, for example, issue of food security. So Nigeria, we hardly produce food in large quantity to reach our demand. So there is this supply-demand imbalance when it comes to food production, and issue of currency devaluation. It's also a problem. From last year to now, we have seen a lot of changes in the exchange rate. Dollar to naira, for example, has been devalued a number of times, both in the official market and in parallel market. And because we largely import a lot of things, so changes in this rate to our disadvantage will definitely push prices up. Another factor is infrastructure, inadequate infrastructure. So even the little food that farmers produce from the rural areas, they cannot transport them to the urban areas. So they largely become waste. So as a result of that, when demand for food commodity is higher than the supply, definitely the prices will keep going up.
Well, it's like the situation is said to be a kind of global phenomenon because it's not only peculiar to Nigeria alone. How bad is the situation in the rest of Africa and around the world?
The situation is actually a global phenomenon, particularly following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which came just as the world was recovering from the impact of COVID-19. So if you look at countries around the globe, they are all battling high inflation rates across Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world. Coming to Africa, the issue is particularly even worse. For example, Ghana's inflation rate is around 53%. If you check South Africa, even though it's significantly lower than Nigeria's, it is around 7.1%. But that is even higher than what they have projected. They just projected around 6%, and now it is trending above 7%. So the situation is across the globe and even across Africa. So Nigeria is not alone in this, because we are connected. Yeah, there is globalization, and so it is something that we have to look at critically. Just look at our own reason for our own inflation vis-a-vis other African countries and see how we can insulate ourselves to the inflationary effects.
But do you think is something that will continue? Because as you said, is in places like Ghana and other places, is it something that will continue? And when we are seeing most central banks tightening their interest rates, is this something that will continue? And considering the cost of living crisis we're already in?
Whenever inflation rates are going up, it becomes a concern. It becomes a concern for the relevant authorities, the monetary authorities. So, meaning that efforts will be made to control the inflation. Because of that, the outlook in the short term, yes, is going to continue, but it's positive. So, towards the third quarter, in my opinion, we are going to see the inflation rate, they will start to slow down, to decelerate, all things being equal.
Okay, well, it's somehow complicated, because when you look at it, because I think part of IMF's suggestion is for countries to continue to tighten interest rates. But what about the risk of now falling into recession?
It is in the interest of the IMF for countries to tighten their monetary policies, because their main objective is to stabilize. Is to stabilize foreign exchange, to stabilize interest rates and supply of money. When we continue to tighten, there is a risk of slow economic growth, and which will, if it continues, will eventually lead to recession. But without tightening, you are allowing the economy and the inflationary rate to continue. So when you tighten, you are kind of moderating the supply of money in the economy. Like the recent increase, central bank have been increasing their the interest rate. It is now up to 18%. So it's just attempt to reduce the circulation of money in the economy. They have its own downside, but well, when the inflation rates keep going up, something needs to be done. So it's in the right direction.
Okay, the National Bureau of Statistics attributed this increase to food inflation. Why is food inflation so difficult to tame?
In Nigeria particularly, food agriculture contributes about a third to Nigeria's economy. That is significant. So if we are having structural issues concerning demand and supply of food items, commodities, food is going to continue to be the major driver of our inflation rate. So I give you this example. Even in our homes, if you check monthly expenses, just look at the monthly expenses, you discover that in average home, about 50, 60, in some cases even up to 70% of expenditure goes to food and food-related items.
Yeah.
So if we are having structural deficit in the supply of food items in Nigeria, it's going to continue to be a major driver in our inflationary indices.
Okay, what other measures do you think is tightening, like monetary policy? Is it enough? What other policy do you think we can, take advantage of to see that we curb inflation? Like just as we've seen central bank has intervened in different sectors to boost production, like the AMCO borrower scheme and other, interventions.
When there is a concern, a problem, a major problem, the best way to approach the problem is to understand the cause. So in Nigeria, like I earlier said, there are many factors responsible for inflation in Nigeria, and some of which are fiscal in nature. So because of that, even though the monetary aspect, tightening and what have you, all the effort that the central bank is making is going to help in taming the inflation, the fiscal authorities also need to do a lot in terms of addressing the trade deficit, for example, in terms of addressing the internal structural issues concerning the production and distribution of commodities. In other words, foods, or let me say goods and services within the country. So unless that is done, it's going to be very difficult. In my opinion, we will continue to have at least double-digit inflation in the near term.
Okay, well, it seems like we don't have much time, but I need to ask you this question before I let you go. With the planned removal of fuel subsidy, how do you see this, issue of inflation? Because now when subsidy is removed, we might likely see our issues being compounded like inflation. So what do you think, how do you see this thing? I mean,
one of the factors responsible for inflation, high inflation rate in Nigeria, it's actually energy costs.
Yeah.
So I didn't mention earlier energy cost. So if subsidy is removed, we are going to see an escalation of the inflation rate.
So what do we need to do to address this escalation? Just fast. Let's be fast about it.
There is not a single formula. A lot of measures need to take. So those responsible for the subsidy removal should actually look at it from the multidimensional perspective.
Okay.
And I'm glad there is going to be a change of government very soon. So I'm sure the incoming administration is having a close look at the situation in order to reduce the impact.
We'll definitely continue to converse.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sani Haruna, financial analyst. Thank you for coming to the program to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And now moving on, let's now take a trip to the commodities market. In keeping with its resolve to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years, the federal government has disbursed the sum of 45.3 billion naira to 29 states and the FCT under the Nigeria COVID-19 Action Recovery and Economic Stimulus (NGCARES) program. Budget and National Planning Minister Clem Agba, who disclosed this at a press briefing in his office, stated that the program is designed to provide immediate emergency relief across various sectors, especially the vulnerable and poor Nigerians affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Nekauko reports.
From school closures to loss of jobs and collapse of MSMEs, the social and economic causes of the COVID-19 pandemic were many and varied. This further admitted more people into the poor and vulnerable cycle, thereby increasing poverty in the country. As a response to the hardship perpetrated by the pandemic, and in line with its vision to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years, the federal government sought and obtained assistance from the World Bank to the tune of $750 million for on-lending to the 36 states and FCT to implement a 2-year emergency response program.
The credit is on lent to the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, which, with each state allocated $20 million and the Federal Capital Territory $15 million. By the program design, the NG Cares is a program for resort, which normally would say a P for our program, where states and the Federal Capital Territory are reimbursed for expanding their own funds if they implement the program in line with signed financial agreement.
After the first round of assessment, Zamfara State emerged the best performing state and received the highest amount from the total sum disbursed. In Abuja, Nneka Oko.
Now, the attention of the Debt Management Office, DMO, has been drawn to a publication by some media houses claiming that Nigeria has defaulted in debt repayment to China, for which its claim penalties stand at 41.31 billion naira. The public is advised to ignore the publication as it is false. A closer look at the media publication shows that the body of the publication is completely detached from the headline, which gives the impression that the publishers of the report may have set out to mislead the public. The public is assured that Nigeria is fully committed to honoring its debt obligations and has not defaulted on any of its debt service obligations. The media report should therefore be disregarded. The Supreme Court has affirmed the Investments and Securities Tribunal's jurisdiction over capital market disputes in the country. Director General of the Commission, Lamido Yogoda, disclosed this during an interview while reacting to the judgment, said the landmark decision confers exclusive jurisdiction on the first to determine all issues listed in Section 284 of the Investment and Securities Act 2007. The DG stated that the Supreme Court, while delivering its judgment in the appeal on January 13, 2023, after going through the facts and history of the matter and reviewing the submissions of the learned counsel representing both parties, found as a fact that the SEC took adequate and sufficient steps to notify the appellant of the sittings and proceedings of the APC. And next is global market update.
Global stocks eased on Wednesday as investors focused on what the Federal Reserve may have to do to tame inflation rather than on the recent problems in the U.S. banking sector. In Asia, markets finished broadly lower. The Nikkei 225 dipped 0.18% at 28,606.76. The Shanghai Composite lost 0.68% and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was 1.37% lower. European markets also slipped. The DAX in Germany sank 0.26%. The FTSE depreciated by 0.38%, and the French CAC declined 0.21%. U.S. stock futures ticked downward as traders weighed the latest round of earnings and sticky inflation globally. Futures tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 0.47%, while S&P 500 futures slipped 0.6% and Nasdaq 100 futures dropped 0.88%. African stocks also retreated in midweek trade, tracking global sentiment. In early trade, South Africa plunged 1.2%. Namibia declined 0.14%, while Ghana was flat.
Well, that's it. Business Express returns tomorrow at 9:30. Do have a pleasant day.